Today we're going to begin with a Photoshop project that has you recreate this set of blocks. I'm going to call it Block Dog, using Adobe Photoshop, making each of the different shapes into its own layer. We'll start with the simple shapes, ignoring the fact that there's a little bit of 3D effect here. We'll just make it in a 2D format, and we'll move on to progressively harder shapes as we go along. So keeping this image up, we're going to start out in Adobe Photoshop, and we will create a new document. And for us, we're going to go to Photo, and we're going to choose a landscape 5x7. Click on Create. Everything we're going to be doing today is about selecting with the marquee tool, filling with the paint bucket, and creating new layers. Each element of the Block Dog will be its own layer. So we're going to start with these circles here and move on to the green squares and this rectangle and go on to some of the more complicated shapes. For each step, I'm going to begin with a new layer. Down here in my Layers panel, at the bottom corner, there's a trash can to delete a layer, and next to that, there is a little button that says Create New Layer. It's a good idea to label your layers, because as you go along, it'll become confusing if you don't have them labeled. So I'm going to start with Nose. I'm going to come down to my marquee tool, press and hold, grab our elliptical marquee. To get a circle, I will hold down my Shift key as I click and drag. You can always resize this later, so don't get too wound up on what size it is. Just get it approximately the size that you want. Double click on my foreground color. Let's make that an orange. And I'm going to click on my paint bucket tool. Now currently I don't have a paint bucket tool, it's the gradient tool. But underneath the gradient tool, if I fly that out, I have the paint bucket tool. Press Ctrl D on your keyboard to deselect. If you want to move that around, use your mover tool. If you want to resize it, hit Ctrl T to transform, and you can scale that holding the Shift key up and down. Press Enter to confirm that. Let's move on to the eyes, which are smaller purple circles. Make a new layer. I will rename this Eye. Again, grabbing my elliptical marquee tool, holding down my Shift key, I will click and drag. Selecting for my foreground color a purple, and fill that in. Because both of my eyes are the same, I'll hit Ctrl D to deselect. I will simply copy that layer by clicking on the layer and dragging it down to the New Layer button. It will now say I copy. Grabbing my mover tool, I can move that over to the side. Photoshop gives me some guides that pop up as I'm dragging to help me align those together. So I have a nose and two eyes. Next up are some of the squares that are on my Block Dog. I'm going to start with the rectangular marquee tool, making a new layer. Let's call this Brow. I will click and drag, and I believe that the brow is a yellow color. Double click on my foreground color, choose something in the bright yellow range. Paint bucket, fill that in, Ctrl D.